His name was Havla Beardsley, and Havla became quite famous in Elkhart, and he was a doctor. But he gave up that profession, and he became an industrialist. He built many mills and around, and he also practiced very, very little. He built a house across the river, which is still here. And he built that back in the 1830s. And the Havla Beardsley home is still here. After Havla Beardsley, the different people did different things. One was very important in Elkhart, and that was Isaac McCoy. And Isaac McCoy was a missionary from Fort Wayne. And Isaac used to travel from Elkhart to Niles, and he stopped at a creek north here of town, and he noticed the creek babbled and made a lot of noise, so he named it after his wife, Christiana, and that is actually how Christiana Creek got mentioned. Isaac McCoy, of course, has a church named after him here, McCoy, and so he became very, very famous along the line. And then when Havla Beardsley, after Havla Beardsley came in, wait a minute, that's dangerous. After Havla Beardsley came in, he was very entrepreneurial. And give me that damn thing. And where was I? See, I told you. After he came in, he caused quite a bit of industry to develop, and the riverboats used to come up and down the river. So they came down the St. Joe River, which starts up here if I had that up right, starts up here where does it start? Hillsdale. Starts at Hillsdale, goes north, then south, and then north again. It's only one of two rivers in the United States that goes north, south, and north again. And the river was very, very important and very, very much used. The river boats would come up from Niles, and they would come up pole boats. There was no engines, no gasoline, no nothing, and they had long boats, and they would walk the length of the boat with a pole and come up the river. And that came quite some time. Well, of course, things progressed, and the next thing that came in town was the railroad, and of course that killed the riverboats, because now people could get up on the railroad. They could go to Chicago, they could go to Detroit. Elkhart started to get to where people could really go places and do things. Excuse me. And so the railroad was very, very important to Elkhart. And after the railroad, of course, things still progressed, and along came the cars, the cars. And the cars came into Elkhart, and this is when people started really going. A little story about the Derby, a true story, by the way. After the program was over, I gave this to some third graders, and I asked the third graders if they had any questions, and one little boy said yes, and he said, "Would you put that funny hat back on?" And of course, I thought that this was the funny hat, so I put this on, and he said, "No, the other one." So I put the derby back on, and I said, "Oh, you like derbies?" And he said, No, he said, I just wondered if everybody in the old days had ears as big as yours. True story. Absolutely true. After the cars, of course, we had airplanes and whatever you had. So that was kind of the formation of Elkhart, was from after the Indians down to the cars in Elkhart. And so Elkhart became very entrepreneurial. So we go into what made Elkhart famous. What made Elkhart famous? The first thing that made Elkhart famous was a man by the name of C.G. Kahn, a man by the same name as C.G. Kahn. C.G. used to like to play the trumpet. Like, Carol, where's Westorf? There she is. And she plays the trumpet too. And not very good, but she plays it. C.G. Kahn was in a parade, and a drunken man on a horse bumped into him and split his lip. Well, in those days, back in those days, when you played an instrument, it was like putting a mouthpiece, and like putting a cigar in your mouth. Mr. Kahn went back to his rubber stamp and grocery store and formed the first and today used by every single brass instrument. This is an original. Formed the first brass mouthpiece, and is still used today. After a few years, there was a man by the name of Mr. Primley, and Mr. Primley's daddy owned a drugstore on Main Street, and he did not like the drugstore business, and he went in the gum business. And we think that he invented the first fruit gum. Before that, when you chewed a gum, it was like chewing paraffin. I love this lady here. She acts like she's really enjoying it. Chewing the gum was like chewing paraffin. So he invented the first fruit gum company, the Primley Gum Company. So Juicy Fruit Gum, you probably remember that Mr. Primley of Elkhart formed the first gum. Yeah, get still. Mr. Primley was a very wealthy man. He moved to Chicago, but he never forgot Elkhart. He left, first of all, Mrs. Primley left quite an endowment to the YMCA, even though she lived in Chicago. Mr. Primley left quite a bit of money in trust to the Elkhart General Hospital, and it was for 2 beds, and I'm sure that both Trevor and Sherm Henson could qualify for that. I think it was in the psych ward. So that was very important. Mr. Sidway owned the Sidway Buggy Company, and it was one of the largest buggy companies in the United States. He would go to lunch, but he would notice that there was a gentleman that never went to lunch, never. And so he stopped and asked him why he didn't go to lunch. He said, "My daughter lives a half a mile outside the city limits. She pushes a baby carriage in, but the baby carriage is too big to put on the trolley." He said, "So I am inventing," and he did invent the first collapsible buggy. So when you see the buggies today and they collapse down, it's because of this German immigrant that came over and worked in the Sidway Buggy Company. So he was very, very very, very instrumental in the development of Elkhart. And there was a little girl. Her name was Kitty Clark, and I knew Kitty. She went to high school with us, although she left high school. But she loved to walk up and down when she was a little girl, walk up and down the street pretending that she was leading a band. Her daddy watched her, and he invented the first baton. And by the way, this is the baton. Kitty gave this to me. And this is the first. And it was made from a cue pool, a pull cue, and he put a knob on each end, and she learned to twirl it. She became very, very famous in the United States because there was a terrible circus fire, which she joined in her senior year, quit school, and joined the circus. And there was a terrible, terrible fire. It was called the Hartford Fire. Many, many people were killed in the fire, but she saved many people by getting on top of an elephant and leading hundreds of people out of a tent. And Kitty just died down in Sarasota just a few years ago, and her mother just passed away not too long ago, and she was about 101. One of the most important things in Elkhart was, excuse me, one block down was called Miles Medical, and Mr. Beardsley was president. Mr. Beardsley lived where Worthmere is today. He was a very common man, and he would walk from Ruthmere down to the factory. Well, he walked down one day and walked in his factory, and very few people were there. There was a terrible influenza, and so there's nothing to do. He walked down the alley, which is now to the Truth Building, to talk to his old friend Mr. Keene. And Mr. Keene was editor of the Elkhart Truth, and excuse me. And he walked in the Truth, and everybody was working. And he asked Mr. Keene, well, with all this influenza, why are they working here? And he said, Mr. Keene said, I feed all of my employees every morning aspirin and bicarbonate soda every noon and every night before they go home. And that intrigued Mr. Beardsley, and he walked back to his factory, which is where Chase Bank is today. He walked back to the factory, and he asked Mr. Trenier if it was possible to put those ingredients into tablet form. And that is how Alka-Seltzer got formed. So Mr. Trenier, surprisingly enough, made an agreement that he would get a penny a bottle or a penny a piece, I don't know which, and he became very, very, very wealthy. But Alka-Seltzer made Elkhart. It was known all over the world. How many of you take Alka-Seltzer? Yeah, it's good stuff, isn't it? It makes you sick. I'm amazed that I can remember these names. Mr. Warnicky. Mr. Warnicky rented a building from John Fieldhouse on the Baldwin Street, and he was there about 2 years and walked out without paying rent. And he was gone about 6 months to a year, and he came back and he asked Mr. Fieldhouse, can you all hear me? Yes. Okay, he asked Mr. Fieldhouse, I keep wandering from this thing, he asked Mr. Fieldhouse if he could retain some of the things he left there when he didn't rent and he didn't pay. Mr. Fieldhouse said yes, and so he did retain, and he asked Mr. Fieldhouse, do you want to know what I did there? And he was an electrician, and his name was Mr. Warnicky. And once again, he left Elkhart and went to Chicago and became very, very wealthy. So Mr. Warnicky in Baldwin Street, and then later sold to General Electric the protocol for the fluorescent light, Elkhart, Indiana, the fluorescent light. So Elkhart was quite famous on that part. In the 40s, on Marion Street, there was two young men, and they invented what they called the global map. And it went on the steering wheel of the car, and it showed every highway in the United States. And you turn the knob as you looked into it while you were driving, and kind of like GPS, it was like GPS. And it was just like today. They looked into that and ran into a telephone pole. They were very, very fun. The invented Elkhart, but we had 14 car manufacturers in Elkhart. The Buckland, Huffman, the Pratt, the Crow. The Pratt and the Crow were the two big ones, and the Sterling, and there was a truck, Kaufman truck. And so Elkhart was quite a automobile place until a young whippersnapper by the name of Henry Ford came along and screwed us. So everything went to Detroit from here. Today, as you all know, mobile home, and we all keep our fingers crossed, and they keep saying they're still selling them, but boy, they're all over Elkhart, I'll tell you. And Thor and Forest River are two of the largest in the world. So we're right back to where we're very, very popular. In conclusion, I was down at the Island Park, and I'm sure I saw some Potawatomi Indians. Walking towards me was a group of 4 guys. They had a headdress on, and they were walking towards me, blah, blah, blah. And yes, they had their weapon. Thank you for coming, Trevor. Thank you for asking me. And I know it was short and sweet, but you were a wonderful audience, which surprised me when I first looked at you. So I love you all. Thank you. Any questions? Any questions? Yes.
I have a question.
Excuse me. I told you I was 98 years old, and so are the years. Talk up.
Well, I thought the size.
Or somebody relate.
Does somebody else have a hand up, please? Oh, okay. Back in the 1800s.
Hold up. Let's do the mic.
Oh, okay, that's good. That's good.
Still done.
Oh, sure.
Okay.
That was quick. Thank you.
Paul, back in the 1800s, I believe, there was a cemetery where Middlebury School is.
Yes, ma'am.
And do you know, I think like in the early 1900s, when did they move the bodies to Gracelawn?
1892. 1892, I think.
1892?
Yeah. That's an interesting story. Thank you. The bodies were moved, you're correct. They were moved to Gracelawn. There was quite a bit of opposition to that. Gracelawn, all of you know where Gracelawn is, on Middlebury Street, the big cemetery. There was quite a bit of opposition to it because it was too far out of town. But the Middlebury Cemetery, the bodies were moved, but not by undertakers. They were moved by the people of Elkhart, and they transported and moved all of the corpses over to, that's all right, come on. Yeah, that's all right, fine, that's okay. You just mess things up. Yeah, so anyhow, yes, Grace Lawn is the oldest cemetery in Elkhart.
Next question.
Come on, I'm not that good.
Okay. Do you have any information on the Grand Army of the Republic in Elkhart?
The what?
The Grand Army of the Republic?
Yes, it was very. It was a Civil War region or baton or whatever you call it. Yeah, very little, but yes, they were very important in Elkhart at that time. You know, Civil War, you know. Talking about Civil War, we had the youngest enlistee from Elkhart in the Civil War, and he was 8 years old, and he enlisted in the Civil War, and he was drummed out about 12 months after he was in because he got the measles. He's buried at Grace Lawn, and you know what the name left me?
Avery Brown.
What?
Avery Brown.
Yeah, well, you're awful young. Avery Brown, she's right, Avery Brown. And he came back to Elkhart, and he taught in the Elkhart schools, and he played the cornet. Karen, he played the cornet, and he's buried out at the cemetery. Yeah, that is, you're right. Mm-hmm.
We had a question over here. Why was the Armory building named the Armory building?
That's a good question. It was built for an armory, but it was never an armory. They had offices upstairs, and there was always a garage downstairs, an automobile downstairs, and that was owned by several people. But some of you might remember it as the A&P. Yeah, and boy, there's a bunch of old people in there. A&P, yeah. So, yeah, so that was very important. That was very important. The armory was there for many, many years, and
Not you, Sherm.
I've heard that Sousa came to town and played on Main Street. Is that true or not true? That there was like a parade with John Philip Sousa? That's just something I've heard. I don't know if it's accurate or not.
Philip Sousa did come to Elkhart because he was a dear friend of C.G. Collins. Now, whether he's in a parade, I don't know. But oh yeah, he can. Hey, we had so many famous people in Elkhart. In my day, Bob Hope, Greta Garbo. Oh, I could just go on and on and on. People that I went and stood in line to see, which I wouldn't go around the corner today. A lady here, Pat Johnson, that I just more than admire. Hold your hand up, Pat. She did Rice Cemetery, Grace Lawn Cemetery, and Prairie Cemetery, where everybody was buried, when they were buried, their marriage, and their age. And she had put books out, and I had them for years, and of course the museum's changed, so yeah. But Pat, I admire what you did. Yeah.
Can I make a comment?
I just published one on the Pleasant Plains Cemetery over on Oakland Avenue and Lusher. That cemetery, there was never any actual names of everybody buried there, but I went in and was able to get 294. Supposedly there was around 300 buried, so I think most of them are listed. It's upstairs, the book that I just recently did.
Pat, you said Elkhart Avenue in Oakland?
Yeah.
Not Elkhart Avenue.
not Elkhart Avenue, Lusher.
Lusher in Oakland, there's a filling station there, and many of the Howard Rush's, Rush,
Jesse.
one of the founders of Elkhart, was buried there,
Jesse.
and he was moved to Prairie. And today Elkhart owns Rice, Grace, and Prairie, and we will have cemeteries for several years. We also have another notable in Elkhart. Are we done?
No.
We have another notable in Elkhart, and that's Larry Happ. And Larry has done, hold your hand up, Larry. He's way in the back, the bald-headed guy. And he's done quite a few movies, or whatever you call them, and of different people, of the Italians. He's done a couple, three of them, me. And he's quite a, whatever you call it, photographer. Yeah. You're gonna lose weight.
I know it. Not you, Sherm. No.
Oh.
Paul, would you tell the group that's gathered here a little bit of your recollection of the start of the recreational vehicle industry, some of the names that were historically acknowledged as the starters, so to speak, and how it all came about?
Now, Sherm asked for your recollections, because we know this is all opinion, right?
I go with the first name. The trailer business, not the recreational, the trailer business started in Mishawaka in Michigan. Mr. Schultz, Wilbur Schultz, noticed and liked what he saw. He bought the trailer factory from a man in Mishawaka, can't think of his name, and he moved it to Elkhart and started manufacturing some of it in the garage on Harrison Street. And then later on, he wanted a more feasible and lookable place. He started showcasing his trailer, Wilbur Schultz, his trailer on Main Street in front of his dad's clothing store. And that's how really the mobile home, or the trailer business, got started in Elkhart, and then later on became mobile home, and today we call recreational. A little side story to that. Ross Martin, who was head of Northern Indiana Brass, my dad, and 4 or 5 other people, all ran around together with their wives, and not together, but separately. Anyhow, and we had a picnic over at my folks' house in the backyard, and I walked up to Mr. Martin, Wilbur Schultz, and my dad, and several other people. And Mr. Schultz was trying to solicit these men for some money to build a trailer. And I can still see him, and I can still hear him. And I can hear Ross Martin and his statement. And he said, Wilbur, there's nobody in their right mind that's going to put a damn house behind their car. And none of them put any money in. Yeah, which we should have done. Other questions? Yes, back there too.
Hi. I want to know, do you know anything about Elkhart, if there was the Underground Railroad involved here?
What? I didn't get that.
The Underground Railroad.
Was there any underground railroad that went through Elkhart?
Underground tunnels or railroad? Underground railroad? You mean the Underground Railroad from this? No, not in Elkhart. There was in Bristol, and then they went directly north. There has been rumors of that, There's also been rumors that Al Capone was there too. He was not here either.
He did make it tonight.
Is the Time Was Museum still open to the public?
The Time Was Museum was opened in 1988, and it was a personal, private thing. And no, it is not open. I sold it, or a gentleman acquired it, and is going to open it eventually down the road, so it's more accessible, and it will be better. And he's a gentleman that loves Elkhart as much as I do. But age kind of dictates. And talking about age, my 74-year-old son just walked in. 73.
Your 53-year-old granddaughter's been here the whole time.
Oh my God, don't open that. So many questions. Any other questions?
Any other questions?
I have a comment.
Now's the time.
What is one of your favorite stories or memories of Elkhart?
Stories of Elkhart?
He can hear you, the mic is on.
I've got hundreds. I've got hundreds of stories about Elkhart.
What's your favorite?
I think the best one is kind of personal. I gave a talk on the River Queen, and as we went down the river, we had a group of Elkhart people, and I made this statement that Bob Hope used to come to Elkhart and stay with Dick Sneidman. Dick Sneidman was head of the American Coating Mills, and he lived right there. And I said they used to stand on the edge of the St. Joe Bank and drive golf balls, try to drive golf balls across the river. They lived where the Borgers live today. And so when we got back to Dick, I hope you're broad-minded. When we got back to Dick, Dick Moore said, you can ask questions. So someone asked me a question, and I said, yes, if you get on a rowboat and go out to the river in front of Borger's home, well, in front of Dick Snyman's home, I said, you probably can find some of Bob Hope's balls. Dick Moore about died, and he never asked me back again. So that's an off-color joke.
Well, I just wanted to say, Paul, that you put the first pair of shoes on me, along with my siblings, my kids.
God, you look too old.
And nobody will ever have a little door like you had. And I've always just admired you. I know you know my family, the Gertz family. You know, Johnny Gertz. He walked the beat. Main Street was his beat. And but thank you for making our feet great. I never have another pair of shoes on my kids or me till we got to where we outgrew your shoes. So thank you, and thank you for this and all your knowledge, and it's great to see you. You look great, and thank you.
That wasn't everything I wrote for you to say.
Why did your store have the little door?
I originally opened up on Lexington Street, which is not feasible for a little door. When I moved to 125 North Main, I was there about 2 years, and we remodeled the front of the store. And, oh, that's an interesting story. That's an interesting story. I wanted to put in a little door. I don't know why. A 4-foot door. I went to Ira Mast, who was a contractor at that time, and he said, yeah, Pittsburgh Paint. So they sent in the plans, the drawings, to Pittsburgh Plate for a regular door and a 4-foot door. About X weeks later, I had a phone call from an engineer from Pittsburgh Plate, and he said, "We have a mistake here." He said, "We have an order for a 4-foot door." He said, "I'm certainly sure you don't want that." I said, "Yes, I do. I want a 4-foot door and regulation width." And he hung up. About 6 weeks later, I still didn't get the door. I got a phone call, and he said, "I'm the head of the engineers," and he said that we have a engineering here for a 4-foot door. And he said, "Don't you think you should have it 5 foot?" Well, I was a little sick of it by then, of them not doing it. I said, "No, I want it 4 foot." And he said, "Well, why are you so insistent on 4 foot?" I said, "Well, I drink a lot, and when I go in the morning and I got a hangover, if it's 4 foot, I'll bang my head. I mean, if it's 5 foot, I'll bang my head. 4 foot, I'll duck." And no questions, I got my 4-foot door, and that's a true story. And by the way, I think, Brian, you got the door, haven't you?
I have the back wood.
He's got the little door. What happened was we put the front door in, and then we had to put a back door in, which was wood and old-fashioned. And because the kids, they park in the parking lot, and they demand to go through the front door, so Mom had to walk all the way around the store, so I had to put a back door in, a little door. And by the way, that's copied. That was copied in, who asked the question? That was copied in California, New Orleans, Little Rock. Yeah, those places all asked me if they could put it. Yeah. Any more questions? Ask the questions, and of course you don't know the answers, so I can tell you any damn thing I want.
Any others?
Here's one.
All right.
Do you have any favorite memories of David Hoover, mayor?
I have favorite memories of every one of them. They were all good and bad. David Hoover was a lawyer and a very nice man. Is he a relative of yours?
He owned our home.
He owned your home. Well, that makes you famous. That and $2 will get you a cup of coffee. Yes, David Hoover. All the mayors were good, except one. And I didn't get along with her at all. That's the only one I didn't get along. But I was a city councilman, and I worked both sides of the aisle, and I really enjoyed politics back then. It was a lot of fun. But today, not. Who said something about Gertz?
I did.
Oh, you did. John and I were real good friends, and I never remember, I always remember John laying in the middle of the street at Jackson Street, car hitting. And everybody went over to him and wanted to pick him up. Well, he didn't know whether any bones were broke or not. He was a city police, one of the orneriest, toughest, meanest damn policemen I ever knew. And he laid in the middle of Jackson Street, and I remember seeing, and I happened to be coming out of my store walking south, and excuse me, and this fellow rapped over, and he was going to pick Johnny up, and I'll never forget it. John pulled his gun, he said, "You touch me and I'll shoot you, you butt." And that was my recollection. And John also taught the city councilman judo, and also how to use a billy club. And to this day, I never used it, but we took lessons, 2 of us, out of the city councilman. Yeah, Johnny was a real good friend. And
He was a good guy.
matter of fact, I had a lot of friends in Elkhart, and if any of you get old, as I am, get out, move. did see people. One thing that has saved my life was I meet every morning for coffee. It's just a group, but it really works. And I have an answer for my longevity, and it's very simple. I didn't die.